Flying High with the Wright Brothers, a story written by Mary Madden. Read to you today by Mrs. Cobb. I'd like you to look at this story for just a moment before I start reading. We are learning about our heroes of history of the Wright brothers. If you remember, we read a story about Orville and his brother Wilbur Wright, and they were the first to fly in our very own North Carolina. If you look at the cover of the book, I bet you've already started to realize that this story is a great story. It's based on history. The Wright brothers were real people. However, this genre, remember we talk about what a genre is the type of story is fiction because it's told by the perspective of the animals, and the animals are able to talk. So someone used their creative mind to come up with a story of what it might have looked like from the animal's perspective of watching the Wright brothers. Again, it's what we call historical fiction. That means that the story is not true. However, the people that are the story are about, those people did actually exist and live. So here we go. Let's get started with our story, Flying High with the Wright brothers. Petey, the wild Corolla pony, and his best friend Taz visited the Wright brothers National Memorial. Petey was excited. It was his first trip to the memorial. "Right here," said Taz, waving his furry paw. "On this very spot is where history was made." Petey stood very quiet and still. He knew something very, very important happened on the same spot a long time ago. There was only one problem. Petey didn't know exactly what that important thing was. "Taz," asked Petey, "who were the Wright brothers and what did they do?" "What?" cried Taz. "You've never heard of the Wright brothers and the story of their first flight?" "No," admitted Petey. "That's okay. Old Taz knows the whole true story." Taz bragged. "Yep, my great, Taz mumbled as he started counting on his fingers. "Let's see, my great, oh, anyways," Taz continued, "my very great grandpappy Raz was there when the Wright brothers made their historic first flight." "Tell me the story," Petey begged. "Once upon a time," Taz began, "there were two brothers named Wilbur and Orville Wright. They lived in Dayton, Ohio. The brothers owned a bicycle shop there. Even as boys, they loved to figure out how things worked. One day, their father gave them a toy helicopter that could fly. From then on, the Wright brothers were interested in flying. When they grew up, they read everything they could about flying. Do you know what they decided to do?" Taz asked. "Build a flying machine," answered Petey. "Sure enough," said Taz, "they decided to go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It was the perfect place. It had lots of wind and soft, empty sand dunes to practice on. For 3 years, Wilbur and Orville came to Kitty Hawk area and on their vacations." Taz continued. "They practiced flying their gliders. They did many different experiments. Each year they learned more about how to fly. Almost every day except Sundays, Grandpappy Raz, Mr. Mockingbird, and Ozzy Osprey sat on the big Kill Devil Hill to see what new things the Wright brothers were doing." "Yep," said Taz. "Grandpappy Raz and his friends were there when Wilbur and Orville made history. They saw the whole thing." It was December 17th, 1903, and it happened something like this. Brr, shivered Mr. Mockingbird. It sure is cold and windy. Those Wright fellows wanted wind, and they sure got it, laughed Ozzy. I hope Orville can control the flyer, worried Raz. The wind must be over 20 miles an hour. Those boys never give up, said Mr. Mockingbird. I still say the Wrights are wrong, said Ozzy. People can't fly. Their gliders work just fine, Raz reminded Ozzy. Sure, they can fly gliders, argued Ozzy, but a flying machine with an engine? No way. Look, cried Mr. Mockingbird. Here comes the men from the life-saving station to help. It must be time to start. Good luck, Orville, shouted Raz as he crossed his fingers. Slowly the flyer moved forward on the wooden track. Wilbur held the wing to balance the flying machine. Just as he let go, the flyer lifted itself into the air. They've done it! Shouted Mr. Mockingbird. Hooray! Cheered Raz. He's going to crash! Yelled Ozzy. With a sudden dart, the flyer hit the ground. Thank goodness Orville didn't crash, cried Mr. Mockingbird, relieved. Short flight, commented Ozzy. The first flight made by man in the history of the world, corrected Raz. Yep, said Taz, finishing the story. The first flight only lasted 12 seconds, but it changed the world. The Wright brothers had invented the first airplane. Wow, said Petey, impressed. Now people can go almost anywhere, explained Taz. Even to the moon, added Petey. The first flight sure was an adventure, said Petey. Sure enough, agreed Taz. But time's a-wasting, Petey, my boy. Let's go, shouted Petey, galloping away. And side by side, their eyes shining with excitement, Petey and Taz started out on their next big adventure. The end.